God bless the brokenhearted, God bless the widow, and God bless the long departed. We've got no idea what we're doing. God bless the Christian, God bless the atheist, God bless the Muslim, God bless the rest of us. We've got no idea what we're doing. We'll never make it on our own. We've got too much dark inside of us. We'll never make it on our own. Keep us so close, every word of us close. Don't let anyone go.
All right, now for our Religions of the World series, speaking on Judaism. Rabbi Shmuly Yanklowitz studied at the University of Texas as an undergraduate, Harvard University for a master's degree in leadership and psychology, Yeshiva University for a second master's degree in Jewish philosophy, and at Columbia University for his doctorate in moral development and epistemology. He is taught as an instructor of moral philosophy at Bernard College and at the University of California, Los Angeles School of Law. Shmuly was ordained as a rabbi by Yeshivat Shavayve, Torah, as a Wexner Graduate Fellow. Rabbi Shmuly has served as a congregational rabbi and as a campus senior Jewish educator and Hillel director of Jewish Life. He's incredibly active here, and I'm proud of the work he's doing, so I want to let you know what he's involved in. As a global social justice activist and educator, Shmuly has volunteered, taught, and staffed missions in 5 continents, including Israel, Ghana, India, France, Thailand, El Salvador, Britain, Senegal, Germany, Switzerland, Ukraine, Argentina, South Africa, and Haiti. Shmuly serves at the World Economic Forum in Geneva and Davos, Switzerland as the rabbinic representative, a facilitator, and motivational speaker. He's the founder and president of Yuri Ul-Sadek, the founder and CEO of Shamayim Vaharetz Institute, and the author of 7 books. He's been filmed in a PBS documentary and was actually on PBS yesterday in Religion and Ethics News Weekly. And I caught a picture of you on the screen, but I didn't want to embarrass you and put it up here. But I took a picture of you on television. And he's collaborated with many Jewish world leaders, such as Michael Bloomberg, Shimon Peres, Michael Douglas, to address pressing social justice issues. Shmuly and his wife, Shoshana, his daughter, Amela, and his son, Lev, live in Scottsdale, Arizona. So let's join me in welcoming our special guest today, Rabbi Dr. Shmuly Yanklowitz.
Thank you so much. Your Hebrew is pretty good, actually. You know, one of the great honors of being here this morning is that I was called rabbi. I was recently introduced at a march by a Christian leader who referred to me as Reverend Shmuly. Now, I explained to him that having one Jewish parent and one Christian parent, my Jewish parent has been very proud of me becoming rabbi, but that day he made my Christian parent very proud. So I am indeed a rabbi, but I would also be honored to be called a reverend. Now, if we had rabbis who were half as cool as your pastor, we would have Jews flocking to synagogue. So thank you. It's an honor to be here with Pastor Gear and to be here with you all and to be a part of this wonderful startup. Because as you know, every startup has a lot of bumps and challenges to make it beyond stage 1, stage 2. But those who have their eyes on the prize and are willing to persevere with a mission, with a higher goal of creating a unique and innovative model to open up our hearts, minds, and souls, the reward is tremendous. So all of you who are a part of the inside and those yet to become a part of the inside, I wish you a lot of blessings in this journey to continue to strengthen your wonderful work. Now today I want to propose that we have 2 enormous threats. One threat we're quite familiar with because we hear about it all the time, and it is fundamentalism or absolutism. Those who believe there is one truth and that they hold it, and everyone else should hold that one truth as well. The other threat, which I propose is equally if not greater, is the threat of the apathetic or the hardcore relativist who says it doesn't really matter what I do with my time, what I do with my life, what I do. And so the fundamentalist can trample upon anyone in the world because the ultimate relativists will be quiet and allow them to trample. We see the worst of religion today, and we also see some of the best. And I think that's the challenge for us today, is in the face of those who say we don't really need to stand up against injustice or hate, and those who are the perpetrators of injustice and hate, to find ourselves in between, to challenge both to act for a more peaceful and just world. So my task this morning is to do a little bit of an introduction to Judaism. How many of you feel relatively familiar with the Jewish faith? Just to get a sense. Okay, we got about half the room. Wonderful. And I think that this is such an important thing to come to understand each other, because the only way we're going to create a global revolution for good is if we actually lock arms together in understanding each other, in collaborating, and to create change in the world together. And so it's really an honor to represent part of my faith this morning, and I look forward to other opportunities to be together where I can learn from you and learn from this wonderful community. So it's hard to know where to begin, but I should probably begin at the beginning, which is Bereshit, the creation story. Now, very few Jews will read the Bible literally, right? There's a strong oral tradition of reinterpretation of the text. And so right from the beginning, there is already a debate about the creation story and what this is actually about. In Jewish circles, the story is rarely read literally. However, there is a commitment that the world is not eternal. Right? This is already a debate back in the days of Plato and Aristotle, that who believe the world is eternal. And the Jewish thinkers emerge and suggest that it's not. There is a moment of creation. And if you really pause and think about the miraculous nature of this, right, the idea that at one point humans didn't exist in this world. At one point, there simply was nothing, or perhaps everything. Right? And then, due to some grace, some kindness, this world came into existence. And so right from that beginning, with Adam and Eve in this vegetarian Garden of Eden, there exists this utopia, which was, of course, unsustainable. Now, Christianity and Judaism start to actually have some theological positions as soon as this first sin emerges, and the nature of this original sin. Now, it's actually interesting, when they eat the Eitz Hadat Tov V'Ra, they eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, moral consciousness becomes born through the first act of consumption. I want to suggest today our greatest impact is not in the elections, it's not in the voting booth, but it's actually in how we spend our money. Right? How we spend our money is actually a vote in our values. Right? And so the very first choice in human history was a choice of consumption. And through that choice of consumption, moral consciousness was born. And of course, inevitably, they are kicked from this garden and move into a world of work. Now, the Shabbat, the Sabbath, is central to Jews as it is to Christians. It is central as a vehicle for social justice. Right? The law in Jewish thought is that you may not work your worker one day a week. You may not work your animal one day a week. This is worker justice. This is animal welfare. You may not work your land one day a week. This is environmental justice. You may not work yourself, right? This is self-care. And so Shabbat emerges as a vehicle for justice of consciousness of the other. Labor law in America, the idea of not working your worker once a week, is only about 100 years old. So the fact of this being 3,300 years old is quite radical. So that's the first of three primary themes in Jewish theology: creation, revelation, and redemption. In creation, there is already a debate: do we live in a centripetal universe or a centrifugal universe? The centripetal universe claims in Aristotelian thought that there is a center in the world and everything is moving towards the center. This is an anthropocentric universe, meaning humans are at the center of the universe, and everything else is in existence for the sake of the center, for the human. The other philosophical view is that we live in a centrifugal universe. That is to say, everything is looking outwards. The human is not the center of existence, but actually we are looking outwards, and everything has its own teleological purpose. Everything is created for its own sake. Every human being, every animal, the entirety of the world exists for its own sake. So it's an interesting philosophical debate to wrestle with. Was it in the state of Israel? Was it somewhere else? Right? Where is the center of the universe? Right? And today it's very hard to imagine. Right? If you look on a space shuttle that's looking out at the Earth, looking out at the planets, is that the center? Is there some place on Earth that is the center? But my favorite approach to that problem is wherever the greatest suffering is, at that moment, that's the center of the universe. So this last week, the center of the universe was Nepal, right? And tragically, we know that that center will continue to evolve because our hearts and souls have to be present wherever the most vulnerable stand. And so we have this theological theme of creation. The second primary theme is of revelation. Of course, this is of debate too. Now, debate is central to Jewish thought. The Talmud, or the central book in Jewish thinking, is 3/4 debate. Or the old joke in Jewish circles is that you find 2 Jews and you'll have 3 opinions, right? So there is constantly this back and forth. It is not a religion of dogma, that there are central beliefs that have to be sort of bought into, but rather kind of a community of debate. So in Revelation, there is also a debate of what happened on Mount Sinai 3,300 years ago. And various approaches emerge as to what happens there. But the famous rabbinic commentator explains that everyone at Sinai, 600,000 men, 3 million people, according to tradition, heard the word of God differently. Right? Now, that's a pretty radical explanation 2,000 years ago, because we didn't understand this philosophically until Immanuel Kant. In the Enlightenment, Kant comes to explain, you don't have access to objective truth. How can you even claim you have access to objective truth? All objective data passes through the subjectivity of the mind, and we interpret our sensory data and make sense of the world. So to claim that anyone has access to the absolute truth is kind of an absurd notion. Or as the great Hindu proverb puts it, right, we all have a blindfold on touching an elephant, trying to explain what we're actually touching, what we're seeing. And unless we're communicating with one another, we can't possibly understand what this is. Or you're standing close to a Picasso painting, right? We can't possibly understand what we're looking at until we back up very far. So already there was an explanation that everyone heard the word of God differently, which is on a basic moral level, suggesting that we need epistemic humility. That is, humility that none of us holds the truth, the absolute truth, and that we need one another. So revelation emerges with this word of God, understood differently, and yet a biblical tradition, the written Torah. By Torah, I mean what is often referred to as the Old Testament in Christian circles, but in Jewish circles is understood as the 5 books of Moses. And then there's the Tanakh. The Tanakh are the 24 books of the Bible, the Old Testament, which has the writings of the prophets and the writings, the later prophetic writings as well. Those 24 books. And so we have creation and we have revelation 3,300 years ago, and then we have redemption. And redemption is the claim that one day we will live in a version of utopia, some sort of existence that is a redeemed world. And the classic view is that there is a Mashiach, there is a Messiah that will emerge, who will help to bring about this era. And that in every generation, this Messiah exists, who will be ready if we are ready. And clearly, in Jewish thought, we have not yet been ready to embrace a redeemed world. But as soon as we are collectively ready, that Messiah is here ready for us. And so that redemption in Jewish thought could be tomorrow, or it could be a very far time down the line, but we should always be working towards bringing this redemption. Now, the 10 Commandments are not so central in Jewish thought, and that's because there are 613 commandments in the Bible that traditional Jews still look to adhere to, and thousands of rabbinic laws that sort of accompany that. But there's a huge debate around the centrality of these mitzvot, these commandments, because in Enlightenment, various denominations emerge, just as they do in Christianity even earlier. And those are primarily Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox. Since then, there's also various flavors as well, the Reconstructionist movement, the Renewal movement, various flavors of Orthodoxy, liberal Orthodoxy, centrist Orthodoxy, ultra-Orthodoxy, the Hasidic Jews, who wear black hats and have curls, side curls from their hair. And this leads to a lot of complexity. So the work I do up in Phoenix and Scottsdale is about building a pluralistic community that tries to bring people of different backgrounds, different ideologies together to learn from one another, to suggest that our commonalities are much greater than our differences, and that we have much to learn from one another and to do together. This should extend not only within our faith, but well beyond as well. And so these denominations emerge with various perspectives as to how we should bring about this redemption, as to how we should interpret this revelation, and to the role of creation. Are we ultimately looking backwards, that truth is found in the past as traditionalists? Or are we looking forward, that truth is found in the future as progressives? Or are we more spiritualists that are deeply present in this current moment, regardless of the past and future? And so the central charge of all these approaches is called Tikkun Olam, the repair of the world. Tikkun Olam is situated within four types of tikkun, or repair. Tikkun atzmi, that repair actually begins with fixing myself. I have to do the work of myself. One rabbi 200 years ago explained this as, first I tried to change the world, and I realized I couldn't, so I tried to change my community. And then I realized that I couldn't, so I tried to change my family. And I realized I couldn't do that either, so now I try to change myself. And this reminder that before we point out at anyone else to be better, we have to point inwards, because every time we're pointing out, we have four fingers pointed back at ourselves as well. And so that's the first type of repair. After Tikkun Atzmi comes Tikkun Bayit, the repair of the home, and then Tikkun Kahal, the repair of our community, and then Tikkun Olam, the repair of the world. And this becomes the central charge, that like Abraham, who is deeply uncomfortable with the world as it exists, right? God says, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham says, will the God of justice not do what is just? Right? That he's willing to protest even God. And to some extent, we should feel radically uncomfortable with the world as it exists today. How can it be that over 1 billion people live on under $1 a day? How can it be that over 2 billion people live on under $2 a day? How can it be that there's such radical poverty and suffering and injustice in the world, and we should feel uncomfortable, and even perhaps, if comfortable, protest God with how can a world like this exist? And yet, as it was famously said, I want to say to God, how can this world exist like this? But I'm afraid that God will ask the question back to me. How can you allow a world like this to exist? And so the challenge comes back to us. I was recently in Senegal where I met a boy named Mamadou. Mamadou translates as Muhammad. And this boy saw that I jumped onto a ship and my shoe tore. And he jumped on and he started to repair my shoe. And I said, no, really, it's just fine. And he started to speak to me in French, because I used to live in France, and so we spoke to each other in French. And he insisted on repairing my shoe. And then I gave him a tip, and we started to speak a little bit. And he explained that his parents could not leave this hut they lived in due to certain physical disabilities they had. And he had 7 siblings who live in this hut, and they relied on him to go out and fix Westerners' shoes who were tourists in his country in order that they could eat that night. And I think about Mamadou all the time because we need these faces and stories in our minds, right? The stories that expand our consciousness to the complexity of the world we live in, to the diversity of the world we live in, and to understand that we ourselves and even our faith is never central to the whole story, but rather a piece of a complicated complicated puzzle. I think of a family I just met in Thailand who lives in a hut, a very small hut, and they work in their rice field every day of the year. Every day, from morning to night, they work in this hut, they work in this rice field, and they bring in $189 a year. Now this is not profit. This is gross sales, and so they struggle deeply. And I think about them and say, what is my role as a Jew? What is my role as a human being to care for and to expand my sphere of consciousness, my sphere of compassion? Now, there's only 13 million Jews in the world today. You know, sometimes they do these comedy skits where they go out with a microphone in the street and ask people questions to see what people know. So sometimes they go say, how many Jews are in the world? And people say like 3 billion, right? But 13 million Jews, and about 6 million of them live in Israel, and about 6 million in the States, and then about 1 million scattered in other parts of the diaspora. And to understand this community, the two most central historical moments of the 20th century need to be understood. Of course, one is the Shoah, the Holocaust, and the second is the founding of the State of Israel. Now, the Holocaust, as I'm sure everyone knows well from their own educational experiences, wiped out over 6 million Jews, in addition to other populations, and was the greatest genocide in human history. And these 6 million Jews were a part of only about 18 million that existed at the time. So really wiping out a third of a people. And this experience radically shook the community, as could be understood, and where healing is still not achieved. Psychologists explain that trauma lasts for about 7 generations. So there's still very much a healing process that's going on. And I want to share one short story with you that occurred just a few years ago. There was a Holocaust survivor who was living in Israel, and his son needed a kidney. He was going to die if he didn't get this kidney. And for years they were looking for a match, and they finally found someone in Canada. They found someone in Canada who was going to be a match, and they flew right away to Canada to try to do the further testing. And in this further testing, they found this is a perfect match. We can't believe it. We found a match for your son. And they said the family would like to meet with you, the family that's going to donate. So the father and the son who will donate his kidney meet with the father in Israel, the Holocaust survivor, and his son who needs the kidney. A very pleasant meeting for about 10 minutes. And then the family leaves, and the doctor comes in, says, I'm very, very sorry, but they've decided they won't donate the kidney to you. And the father says, I don't understand. I'm a Holocaust survivor. I lost all my family. This is my only son who's alive. I'll do anything. What can I do? They said, I'm sorry, the family said they won't do it. They go and they meet with the son. They say, please, will you help me save my son? He says, I would donate my kidney to your son, but my father has said I'm forbidden, so I'm sorry, I can't do it. They fly back to Israel, incredibly disappointed. He doesn't know what he's going to do. And they say, we have to find this father. We have to talk to him. They find his number. They call him. They say, please, I'll do anything. He says, I'm sorry, my decision is final. My son will not donate his kidney to your son. He said, I'm flying back to Canada to meet with you again. I need to convince you. He says, you can fly back, but my decision is final. He flies to Canada anyways. He says, please, all my family was wiped out in the Holocaust. This is my only child. He's going to die if he doesn't get your son's kidney. Why won't you do this? And the man looks at him and he says, you really don't recognize me? He says, what? He looks at him in the eyes. He says, no, I don't. He said, you don't remember me from Auschwitz, from the concentration camp? He says, that's you? He says, they asked you to take my son and to kill him. The Nazis ordered you to kill my son, and you did it. I can never have my son donate his kidney to your son. He said, that's you? But I never killed your son. I took your son and I hid him away, and I kept him alive, and I raised him as my own son. And that boy who's going to die without getting a kidney is actually your son. And he's a match for a kidney with your other son because he's his brother. Now, this was verified by Snopes, this story. And I think about this story all the time because sometimes the person who we think is our enemy is actually our greatest liberator. Sometimes we have to open our heart just a little bit wider to feel for the other and to hear their story and realize how intertwined our story is with theirs. We have all these barriers on our heart that hold us back from living to our potential. And sometimes we have to let go of some of those pains. One of my great rabbis, Mother Teresa, has a story where, she really changed the position of nun so radically as someone who moves from prayer to going out into the streets and helping the vulnerable. And she would travel through the streets of India finding sick, dying people and try to help them. And she heard crying from a dumpster, as she heard all the time. And there was an old woman dying in a dumpster, and she climbed into the dumpster next to this woman. And this woman was so sick and so old and in so much pain in this dumpster. And she says, I want to bless you that you should die now. Why won't you just die? And she said, because I have so much resentment that my sons left me here. And she looks her in the eyes and says, forgive them now. This old woman takes a deep breath, forgives her sons, takes one last breath, and then dies. And I think about this Mother Teresa story all the time because in this case, resentment was holding her back from dying as she need to. But how often in our lives is resentment holding us back from living as we need to? That we can't blame anyone else. All we can do in the end is take responsibility for our own existence to live our fullest. And so one of the core values in Jewish thought, and I know it's central to Christianity as well, is free will. That we are free to make choices in our lives, to determine our destiny. Now, unfortunately, it was 3 Jews who tried to undermine free will, who had strayed from the traditional view of the importance. And those 3 Jews were Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, and Baruch Spinoza. Karl Marx said, we're not free. We're determined by our socioeconomic status, right? If you are of a wealthy class or of a poor class, you are determined by that position in society. Freud suggested we're not free. We're determined by our early childhood experiences. The way you related to your parents when you were 1 and 2 and 3 determines the course of your life. And Spinoza said we're not free. We're determined by that innate stuff in us, by our genetic disposition. And so these 3 Jews, Marx and Freud and Spinoza, tried to undermine it, but central to Jewish thought is that we are free and ultimately responsible for our own destiny. We are responsible to repair ourselves, to repair our families, to repair our community, and to repair this world. We can't do this work ourselves. We need partners to do this together. And so the question emerges, what am I willing to sacrifice in order to really make the world a better place? What am I willing to give up? And friends, if you open your heart with me for just a moment, just recently I received a donation online to the organization I lead. And it was a little bit strange because the donation was for $5. If Jews want to give a little bit, they usually give 18, because 18 represents life. So Jews want to give a very small, but $5 was quite strange. And so I said, this is interesting. And it said on this donation, in honor of my mother. So I scrolled down further, and it said address, homeless. And I was so moved by this, that what a sacrifice to not have a home, be struggling, but somehow have gathered $5 together and said, I want to donate this in honor of my mother. So I turn back to us and say, what are we willing to sacrifice for our values? What are we willing to curb of our own desires, of our own time, of our own money, of our own resources, to say, this world is much bigger than me. This city is much bigger than me. My family is much bigger than me. This community, this congregation is bigger than me. What am I going to give? Because ultimately, in 100 years from now, virtually no one will remember any of our names. We will have been forgotten from this world. But perhaps we will have left a little bit of a mark. We will have left this world a little bit more beautiful through our work. And so perhaps you identify as a Christian, I identify as a Jew, whatever those are deep and meaningful commitments that can't be dismissed. But on a much deeper level, we are all just human beings in this world together, trying to understand the complexity of this universe, trying to leave the world a little bit better, a little bit more beautiful. I give you the blessing, and I ask that you bless me back, that we can dedicate our lives, every moment of our existence, towards leaving this world more beautiful. And I leave you with this last thought. If someone came to you today and they said, every day for the rest of your life, I'm going to drop $86,400 in your bank account. $86,400 in your bank account. Sound good? Terrific, wonderful. Where do I sign up? But here's the one condition. At the end of every day, you have to have spent every dollar. Otherwise, the money will be erased. That is the opportunity we've been given. 86,400 seconds every day. And every day those seconds are gone. And our challenge is to make every second holy and special, to bring more sanctity and justice and peace into the world. It's a tremendous honor to be with you this morning. Thank you so much.